I am Rudo, a slum kid who specializes in breaking into the rich people's junkyards to steal usable items. However, my life took a different turn when I was falsely accused of murdering my adoptive father and thrown into the abyss, where all the world's trash is dumped. Here, I am forced to fight giant monsters made of garbage to find my way back and exact revenge. This world is divided into two parts. On one side is the magnificent city, where the rich enjoy luxurious lives, and on the other are the slums, reserved for people like me. The only common ground is the abyss, where all trash, including criminals, is dumped. The rich people living in the city casually discard items that are only slightly damaged without hesitation. Just like that woman told her daughter to throw away the newly bought plush dog just because it was torn. She said that if they tried to fix it, the toy would look ugly, and they could just buy another one later anyway. The little girl had no problem with that, and her mother threw the plush dog along with other trash into a small trash chute, sending it straight to a truck in an underground tunnel, leading to a massive landfill. However, I, Rudo, was also at that landfill, buying back the things the trucks brought in. I sneaked into the landfill and entered one of the rooms, but unfortunately, a guard heard a noise coming from it, and he immediately went to check and found someone rummaging through the trash. The guard burst into the room, pointed his gun at me, the trash thief, calling me a disgusting pervert, threatening the city's beauty by hoarding garbage. I didn't even bother to respond, as I heard these words every Tuesday. But then the guard sounded the alarm, calling for reinforcements. As soon as more guards arrived, I threw a few bags of trash at them, and the clean freaks couldn't stand a few raw eggs sticking to their uniforms, so they just stood there, watching me climb into the ventilation shaft without doing anything. I crawled out of the ventilation shaft near the exit, but the gate slammed shut right in front of me, and right then, more guards arrived. Shoot 'em. They're a bunch of— Yes, I am the threat here. The next day, news of the trash bandit spread throughout the city, and everyone blamed the people of the slums on the other side of the wall. The slum dwellers knew exactly who to blame, because this wasn't the first time I had been to the landfill. They thought that one day I would be caught, and most of them actually hoped so. I paid them no mind as I set up my shop to sell the repaired items I had found. When my friend Chiwa came and scolded me, she asked why I risked my life just to rummage through the city dwellers' trash. I replied that those damn rich people didn't even care about discarding perfectly usable items. I felt sorry for the things they threw away, so I picked them up, and since I could make a little money by selling them, all the better. Chiwa seemed to understand me, but right then, 3 boys approached, pinching their noses and saying that someone here reeked of trash. They told Chiwa to stay away from me, or she would also smell like trash. They insulted my thick black gloves, saying I hadn't washed them since Obama was president, and that a mere touch would be enough to cause a rash. One guy kicked away the lantern I had just finished fixing, saying that no one would buy my junk anyway. He said my hands were even more disgusting than the gloves, which is why I always kept them hidden. I silently listened to everything they said, but when one of them called me the son of a murderer, I suddenly snapped. However, the kids didn't stop. They said the slums were built to imprison criminals, and that the people living there now were their descendants. That's why they always tried to keep their reputation clean. But my father brought shame upon them by becoming a murderer. I couldn't stand the insults any longer, and gave the kids a death glare that scared them stiff, making them wet their pants and immediately run away. As they ran, they cursed at me, saying that one day I would also become a murderer like my father. After that, I quietly began to fix the lantern again, and Chiwa told me that she believed I was a good person and would never become like my father. Hearing that, I felt a bit awkward, but before I could thank her, Chiwa's attention was drawn to the plush dog toy I had picked up from the landfill last night. It turned out I had brought the plush dog back as a gift for her all along. But before I could give it to her and increase my risk level, Chiwa's mother arrived and took her away. Afterward, I went home and found my adoptive father, Regto, wait. Regto suddenly started mimicking my anxious demeanor when trying to give the plush dog to Chiwa, and my face flushed, as I had no idea he had been watching us. Regto told me that could wait, because first, they needed to talk about my little trip to the dump. Regto told me that I didn't need to push myself so hard, because they weren't that destitute. He thought I felt a bit indebted to him for adopting me after my biological father was thrown into the abyss for being a murderer. But I said that wasn't it. I told Regto that I considered him family, and I was just trying to do my part. Regto simply told me to be that honest with Chiwa, and I suddenly fumbled, aggravating the gunshot wound from last night. Regto immediately gave me first aid and also changed the bandages around my hands. As I looked at my hands, I remembered they had been injured since I was conscious. Everyone always judged me for it, and sometimes my wounds would start aching like hell for no reason. Then one day, Regto gave me black gloves, and they miraculously eased the pain. After Regto finished tending to my wounds, he told me to confess my feelings to Chiwa soon, or someone else would snatch her away. And while the two of us were joking about it, a strange masked man was listening to everything from outside in the street. The next day, I finally gathered enough courage to confess my feelings to Chiwa, and went to her house with the plush dog. But on the way, I encountered a not-so-uncommon sight in the slums. At the edge of the slum, there was an abyss where all garbage and serious criminals were thrown. Today, another criminal was being thrown into the abyss, and I could only stand and watch the execution, wondering what would happen to those inside that chasm. Just then, Chiwa arrived and said that this scene was quite brutal, and I panicked because I wasn't ready to see her. Chiwa suddenly started talking about executions and other things. Then she told me that she didn't want me to be thrown into the abyss. She said that there might be many things that shouldn't be discarded like trash, but that wasn't a good enough reason for me to risk my life. I replied that Regto said the same thing, and Chiwa said it was because Regto loved me too. It took me a second to process the information. Chiwa just said that Regto loved me too, and my 2 megabyte RAM brain understood that Chiwa meant she loved me. She was flustered when she realized her words could be interpreted that way. But I had already lost my mind. I fell to the ground, covering my face, then gave the plush dog to Chiwa and said that she might not want it because it came from the trash, but I thought the plush dog would be happier with her. To my utter delight, Chiwa accepted the toy, saying she would cherish it, and I was happier than ever. I danced all the way home, thinking I had to show Regto right away. On the way, I bumped into a few guards. They didn't even bother with me, but I was curious why they were in the slums. Anyway, I got home and started telling Regto what had happened as soon as I opened the door, but I froze when I saw Regto lying on the ground with a strange masked man on top of him. The masked man turned to look at me, before plunging the knife deeper into Regto's body. Seeing this scene, I lost my temper and lunged at the masked man. But I was struck so hard that I didn't even realize when I was knocked down. When I came to, the masked killer was done. He picked up a book from the floor and walked out, glancing at me. I tried to follow him, but then I heard Regto's voice. Regto was somehow still alive, and with his last breath, he told me to run. I immediately went to his side, promising I would go find help. But Regto just told me to run and change this rotten world into a better place. After saying that, Regto's body went limp, and I couldn't understand what was happening. Just then, the soldiers arrived and they tasered me, believing I was the killer. They pinned me to the ground and said I was arrested for murder, and I told them it wasn't me. The guards told me that what I said no longer mattered, because they had caught me red-handed. I kept trying to tell them that the real killer had just left the house, and they could still catch him, but the guards didn't even want to listen, so they just knocked me out the traditional way by punching me in the head. Soon after, I was taken to the gallows for my execution. Everyone from the slums was there to witness me being thrown into the abyss, and there were even some prominent figures from the main city as well. The judge told me that murder was one of the greatest crimes a person could commit, and even though I only killed a slum dweller, the punishment would not be mitigated. He declared that I would be killed by being thrown into the abyss, and everyone started cheering when they heard this. I still couldn't believe this was happening to me, and I just wished for someone to believe that I wasn't the murderer. My eyes scanned the crowd and stopped Chiwa. I yelled to her that I didn't kill Regto. I asked her to find the culprit, but she just said that she had believed me, but I didn't deserve it. She said that in the end, I was also the son of a murderer, and dropped the toy as she turned her back on me. Her betrayal hurt me more than anything else, and I snapped at those who called me the scum of humanity, deserving to be thrown into the abyss. I said that they were the scum here, for they were just lumps of flesh without brains or will. I swore that I would send them all to hell, when suddenly I realized the killer was also in the crowd. However, I didn't get a chance to tell anyone about it because I was thrown off the edge of the cliff. I felt like I had been falling forever, and at one point I lost consciousness. Fortunately, all the trash at the bottom of the abyss cushioned my fall, and when I woke up, I was completely unharmed. I wondered what the hell was happening, and how I was still alive when the foul stench of this place suddenly assaulted my nostrils. Even a trash scavenger would have to cover their nose to block the smell, and then I realized a vast sea of trash lay before me, along with things I didn't recognize. I wondered what this hellish place was, when suddenly a gigantic shadow enveloped me. I turned to see what was happening and couldn't believe my eyes when I saw a colossal monster made of trash bearing its fangs at me. My mind went blank for a moment upon seeing the monster, and I remembered always finding it strange that everyone was obsessed with throwing trash and human refuse down into the abyss. But no one ever cared about what actually happened to them down there. They didn't even consider what else might be at the bottom, and that bothered me more than anything else. However, I quickly snapped out of my thoughts and started running for my life as the giant monster began to approach. Things suddenly got worse. The monster roared loudly, and as a result, more monsters crawled out of the piles of trash. They began chasing me. I ran as fast as I could, but it was all useless because soon I was cornered. I wondered what these monsters were and if they were actually piles of trash that could move on their own. The monsters suddenly lunged at me, and I somehow managed to dodge their attacks. I tried to run away, but tripped and fell directly onto a human skull, which made me realize what my fate would be. I cursed the bastards who threw me into this hellhole, and just then, the pile of trash I was standing on collapsed. I quickly found myself at the base of a cliff, keeping me at a safe distance from the monsters. But there was something else killing me. I realized that the air in this place was actually toxic, and if I breathed it too long, my lungs would be torn apart. I used my glove to cover my mouth and nose, hoping to find a place to hide and recover. But then I suddenly realized that a safe place might not exist in this hell. I began to lose hope and suddenly vomited blood, the sound of which attracted the monsters towards me again. I fell to the ground, unable to move, and I had almost accepted my fate when suddenly the image of Regto's dying body flashed in my memory. A strange power suddenly surged in my hand, but I didn't pay attention to it. However, I felt my vision change, and I began to see lights emanating from the trash piles and from the iron pipe in front of me. I crawled towards it, determined to survive, because I had a reason to live. I grabbed the iron pipe and stood up, declaring that I would return to the surface and avenge those who had pushed me down here, and also the bastard who killed my father. Rage began to well up inside me, and the monsters took this opportunity to creep closer to me. However, when one of them attacked me, I simply smacked it away with the iron pipe without even looking. As a result of that attack, a monster flew off and crashed into another Abyss Dweller's umbrella, who was surprised that anyone could fight against the monsters that had arrived here. Meanwhile, I had gone berserk fighting the monsters. I didn't care about the toxic air or the blood running down my nose as I kept leaping around. And even getting slammed into large rocks at high speed didn't seem to cause me much damage. A monster crushed the rock I was stuck in, burying me in the rubble. But I broke free and pulled out a pole. I swung it with all my might, dealing significant damage to the monster, but then suddenly another monster appeared right beneath me. I somehow jumped out of its jaws, but then the effects of breathing the toxic air finally caught up to me. I started vomiting blood again, and the monsters took this opportunity to crawl closer to me. Fortunately, my mysterious power surged once more, giving me the strength and madness to stand my ground, even as two monsters attacked me at once. I escaped the collision safely and used a metal plate to cleave the first monster's skull. Then, I attacked the second monster, cutting it in half and making it explode. I rested for a moment, but then another gigantic monster began to approach me. As soon as I saw it, I decided to flee and recover my strength. But the monster stomped its foot on the ground with all its might, creating a shockwave that sent me flying. However, when I opened my eyes, I was shocked to see a strange masked man standing over me. I wondered who this guy was and where he came from. But the man suddenly picked me up and kicked me forward. I coughed up some blood and was about to charge at him when the man suddenly put a gas mask on my face, allowing me to breathe again. Now, I was truly confused and asked the man if he was a resident of this place. I wanted to know about this place and the monsters here, but the masked man just told me to be quiet. Apparently, someone with a single-digit IQ couldn't understand orders, and I kept loudly asking him about this place. The masked man once again whispered for me to be quiet, but I told him to speak up. I asked if we were underground, and the masked man finally snapped. He forgot his own advice and yelled at me, saying that we weren't underground but on the surface, and that it was the fault of those living above who had turned this place into a hellhole. Then, he told me that the giant trash monsters were attracted by sound, and thanks to me not shutting up, they had noticed him. The masked man said that the trash monsters could not be defeated by ordinary weapons, so their best option was to sneak away quietly, but now it was no longer possible. A monster had arrived behind them at this moment, and the masked man decided to deal with it before anything else happened. A surge of golden energy suddenly appeared from his arm and covered his umbrella, turning it into a weapon. The monster attacked them, but the masked man simply rotated the umbrella into its face, using it like a handheld grinder to crush the monster. The monster's fragments scattered everywhere, and they suddenly turned into dust. I was surprised by this strange power surge, but now I was even more curious about the monsters not regenerating after being hit by this attack. Just then, a horde of gigantic monsters arrived, but the masked man was confident he could handle them all. He charged towards the monsters, quickly blowing them away with his blade umbrella, and then jumped, using the umbrella like a parachute. I wondered if this was a type of technology used by the Abyss Dwellers, or if it was exclusive to the masked man. Meanwhile, the masked man glided in front of the last remaining giant monster, which suddenly spewed an acid orb towards him. He blocked and dispersed the acid with his umbrella, and the acid exploded violently upon contact with the trash heaps. The masked man then used the monster's head as a springboard to jump higher, and then he channeled more energy into his umbrella, increasing its size and destructive power. He plunged down onto the monster's head with that umbrella, cleaving through it and the ground as well. When that was done, the masked man turned back to me, and I asked him, "What the hell are you?" The man removed his mask and introduced himself as Engine, a simple cleaner. But soon after, the toxic air made him regret his decision. Engine cursed me for making him take off his mask, and then suddenly, I collapsed. While unconscious, I dreamed of an event from my childhood. I had come home after being bullied by other boys and pushed into a sewer because I told them that objects had life, and they didn't believe me. Regto asked me if I fought back, and I replied no. I asked Regto if he was telling the truth when he said that when an object is treated with care, a soul will eventually come to reside within it. As Regto cleaned me up, he said that story was just an old legend to make people appreciate what they have. But personally, he liked to believe that everything had a soul. Hearing that, I grew more curious and asked if the things around our house had souls, including my gloves. Regito simply replied that if I treated them with care, one day they would have souls. I suddenly woke up from that dream and found myself chained and being dragged by Engine. I cursed at him, telling him to let me go, but Engine said he was just taking me to a safe place. I no longer cared about that because I wanted to go back for revenge. But those words made Engine stop. He told me that it was impossible to climb back to what they called the celestial sphere, which was basically in the sky and constantly moving. Then, he continued dragging me, saying that going back now was impossible, and I should calm down and accept my new circumstances. However, I refused to give up, saying I would return to the celestial sphere at all costs. I believe Engine knows the way there but is hiding it from me, and I yelled at him to tell me everything he knew, or I would keep screaming until more monsters arrived. Engine became furious at this, and he told me he would show me exactly what this place was like. He started dragging me more carelessly, and eventually led me to a clearing in a canyon, 100 times cleaner than the surroundings. Engine dropped me there, telling me to enjoy myself. As he quickly left, I cursed him for at least untying me, but Engine left without a word. Suddenly, a group of men in gas masks emerged from a truck and began to approach me. I wondered if they were residents of this place, and everyone was incredibly curious about me too. Based on my clothes, they wondered if I came from the celestial sphere, and they approached me menacingly with their questions. I nervously told them that I'd fallen from the celestial sphere, and the men suddenly threw off their masks. They seemed overjoyed to see a living person from the celestial sphere, as before they had only ever found corpses. They became overly curious and started examining my face, and I immediately recoiled. The men said they meant no harm and began to untie me, which made me think they were much better than Engine. However, it was all a trap, and soon after I found myself heavily chained inside a truck. I wondered what was going on, but the men outside spoke of how lucky they were to have captured a living person from the celestial sphere, as he would surely fetch a very high price. They talked about how people paid crazy prices for the body parts and clothes of deceased people from the celestial sphere, and finding such a rarity would drive them wild. Then, the leader of the group told me that the reason people were willing to pay such a large sum for someone from the celestial sphere was because they hated them. He cursed the people living on the celestial sphere for dumping all their waste onto the planet until it piled up, polluting the air and creating monsters. Those who died from monsters or lost their homes due to toxic air and land harbored a deep hatred for people from the celestial sphere, and once they found a living one, they would torture him brutally. The leader then decided to give me something to eat to welcome me to the surface, and that food was rotten meat and other spoiled things. He kept taunting me, saying that people from the celestial sphere like me wouldn't even touch trash, so I couldn't possibly digest food like this. However, When he tried to force a piece of meat down my throat, the man made the biggest mistake of his life. I suddenly bit his finger, ripped off a chunk of flesh, and ravenously chewed it along with the rotten things I had eaten earlier. Then I began to eat the rotten food, saying it wasn't trash because it was still perfectly edible. Those guys were scared stiff because they had never seen a beast like this, but that was just the beginning. I was angry at everyone for labeling everything as trash and unworthy of use, and I would no longer sit idly by. My power erupted again, and I shattered the chains. I leaped out and unleashed my energy onto the ground, lifting objects around me. Injin watched everything from afar, and he was really pleased to see that I turned out to be a giver, someone who could breathe life into objects and harness their power, just like him. Meanwhile, on the ground, I thought of Regto's words that treating objects carefully would make them come alive, and they would in turn treat their person carefully. I threw off my mask and grabbed the chain that had bound me, breathing life into it and turning it into a weapon. The men charged at me, but I simply slammed the chain onto the ground, forcing them back. Their leader told his men to aim for the chain because a giver would be useless without their object, and his men quickly disarmed me. However, to their utter astonishment and Injin's immense joy, I picked up a tire and turned it into a weapon, which was incredibly rare even for powerful givers. I quickly dealt with the men and then approached their leader, who continuously cursed at me while being scared stiff. But just as I was about to attack him, Injin arrived and stopped me. I suddenly snapped out of my frenzy, and my power faded. The tire I was using suddenly turned to dust, and my nose bled as I tried to figure out exactly what I had just done. Injin said that using power so recklessly would surely tire my body. Then, he apologized for testing me like this, but he wanted to be certain of my power. He promised to tell me everything about this world and my power. But, in return, he wanted me to join the cleaners, because they needed people like me to fight the monsters. However, that was a bit too much for me to process, and I said that I didn't want to join them. As it turned out, Injin didn't know what the word no meant, and he took me to a clinic for treatment while calling his friend to say that he had found a genius and recruited him into the cleaners group. I was shocked to hear that because I had never agreed to join him. I said that I needed to return to the celestial sphere immediately, but the weird doctor with eyes larger than billiard table pockets told me to stop talking. He yelled at me for going out into the wasteland because the air there was truly toxic. He called me a stupid sandwich for getting kidnapped and told me to thank Injin, who had saved me from 2 terrible fates in one day. I cursed Injin under my breath, and then the doctor, who turned out to be an old woman and was offended when I called her an old man. When she finished the treatment, she kicked Injin and me out. Outside, I thanked Injin for paying for my treatment and told him that I just needed information on how to get back. I said that I didn't have time to be a cleaner or whatever he called himself, but Injin replied that he hoped being kidnapped would teach me how people from the celestial sphere are treated down here. He told me that if anyone found out I was from the celestial sphere, I would regret ever being born. And furthermore, I couldn't find any information for free here. Injin then led me to a ruined city, but it was much better than the filthy world outside. He even treated me to a burger, and I devoured it without restraint because I had thrown up all the rotten meat I had eaten earlier. I used to think the abyss would be nothing but trash, but here there are cities with people living in them. I noticed a girl walking into a store and started staring at her, but then Injin decided to give me a lesson about the surface. He said that trash isn't the only thing that accumulates here, as emotions also accumulate in the form of an energy called. The trash monsters are one of the ways it manifests, and although they are mainly in landfills, sometimes they also attack cities. He said that ordinary weapons couldn't harm the trash monsters because their cores were made of. Rudo's gloves, however, could. I was surprised to hear this, and Injin told me that when an object is treated carefully for a long time, it also accumulates within it, and they call such objects life-infused items. Life-infused items can destroy the cores of trash monsters, but not everyone can harness the power within them. Injin said that people like us who can harness that power are called givers, and their organization, the Cleaners, is full of givers who specialize in eliminating trash monsters. I asked Injin if he promised to tell me how to return to the celestial sphere if I joined the Cleaners group, and he replied that he had no clue about that. I got angry at him for deceiving me, and Injin reminded me that he never said he knew how to get me back. However, he insisted that his boss was very wise and could help me on my journey home. I was angry because now I needed to meet Injin's boss before making a decision. But then Injin asked me about the gloves. I told him my father had given them to me and they were the only thing I had to remember him by. Now Injin understood why I cared so much about the old gloves, and he told me to treat them carefully because they had a powerful soul within. I was touched because others always made fun of me for my gloves. But then Injin received a message and decided to go meet a colleague. I suddenly stood up and thanked him for everything, and in return, Injin threw me a bag of money, telling me to be careful how I spent it. I couldn't believe he would give me money after everything he had done for me. But Injin said it wasn't a big deal because he got the money by selling my clothes. That's how he was able to get me treatment and feed me. So I didn't even need to thank him for it. Hearing that, I went ballistic, but Injin told me that I couldn't walk around the city in Celestial Sphere clothes anyway. He said he was going to meet his trainer now and told me to wait patiently here. I was really angry at him, but then I noticed a cat taking my money and running away. I chased after it immediately, but couldn't catch the cat. Luckily, I spotted a scythe-shaped staff on the road and immediately picked it up, using it to stop the cat. As soon as I managed to corner the cat, the staff's owner arrived and he was furious at Rudo for trying to steal his precious staff. I asked him what was so precious about this stupid stick, and the man grew even angrier. He quickly snatched his staff back and then pushed me away, saying I would have to pay for my transgression. Before that, the man started acting strangely with the staff, and I was completely confused. Right then, I saw the symbol of the cleaners group on Injin's umbrella and realized that the guy in front of me was also a cleaner. He activated the staff's power and turned it into a weapon, attacking me with it. However, he intentionally missed because Injin had told him about me. After that, he introduced himself as Zanka, who would be in charge of training me at Injin's request. He said he never thought he would have to teach a kid not to steal from others, and I told him that I only borrowed the staff to get my money back. Zanka said that my father must not have raised me properly, and I got really angry because I couldn't stand anyone insulting Regto. However, when I thought about Regto, I remembered that he once told me that if I wanted someone to listen to me, I should take a step back in an argument and try to understand the other person's feelings. According to those words, I thought Zanka had a right to be angry because I had suddenly taken his treasured possession. I felt that I would also be angry if someone took my gloves, even if by accident, and realized it was my fault. I apologized to Zanka for that, and the man calmed down just as quickly. He told me that everything was fine because I had returned the staff, and that he should also try to react more calmly. Well, I was completely confused by his sudden change in personality, and also because it was the first time I managed to defuse a stressful situation just by talking. I kept thinking that Regto was right about more things than I thought, and then Zanka helped me up. He asked me about my life item and what I could do with it. I told him that my life item was probably my gloves, but I didn't know their capabilities yet. Zanka examined my gloves and commented that they were really cool, but I was still amazed at how different he looked now. I suddenly realized that it must be because he was smiling, and Regto always told me to smile if I wanted to make friends. Unfortunately, I had never smiled before, and I would need a physical trainer to teach me how to use my facial muscles correctly. Even more unfortunately, I didn't know that, and I tried my best to imitate a human smile, but ended up creating the most horrifying expression Zanka had ever seen on a human face. He got angry at me again, asking me what kind of face I was making. He asked me if I was mocking him with that face, and I asked him why he was angry this time, as this was the best smile I could make. Zanka said that even a blind person could tell that wasn't a smile, so I decided to close my eyes and purse my lips to look more natural. This time I looked less scary, but that wasn't enough to stop Zanka from getting angry. He thought I was too arrogant because Injin called me a genius, and now I was mocking him. He said that I would never achieve my goals if I kept being so frivolous, but that was a line he shouldn't cross. I thought about my goal of returning to the Celestial Sphere and changing it according to Regto's last wish. And I told Zanka that I was completely serious about them. I told him not to insult me anymore, and Zanka drew his weapon again, saying that they wouldn't get along. I agreed with him and pulled an iron bar from a nearby trash can, awakening its power. Zanka was shocked to see me use a random object as my life item, and he realized why Injin called me a genius. However, he was still confident that if I only had innate talent, I wouldn't be able to defeat an ordinary person like him, who had worked hard to reach this level. I didn't even realize the taunt was a feint, until Zanka's staff landed right in front of me, just inches away. I was forced to dodge and run as Zanka attacked, and quickly pinned me to the ground. Zanka was pleased with his victory, but then he noticed something on his face. He wiped it off and then curiously sniffed it, discovering that it was poop. He panicked when he realized that the metal bar I picked up was part of a toilet plunger. He tried to explain what a toilet plunger was, but I was not in the mood to listen to anything, and I started swinging the plunger, which was still full of someone's dinner. Zanka panicked and tried his best to dodge the things flying everywhere, and eventually, he ran away from me. I didn't understand why he was so scared now, but it worked in my favor anyway, so I chased after him, terrorizing Zanka with the toilet plunger. After running through various alleys like in a Tom and Jerry cartoon, Zanka burst out onto the main street with me close behind. Suddenly, a cat tripped Zanka and he lost his balance, giving me an opportunity to close the distance. I jumped high, swinging the toilet plunger with all my might at the terrified Zanka. He was hit by a flurry of poop and passed out. And a moment later, Engine arrived to check on them. He asked me if I had met my new teacher yet, and I just pointed at Zanka, who was lying on a pile of trash and twitching frantically. Engine helped him clean up and took him away, but he couldn't help but laugh at Zanka being knocked out by poop. I was also traumatized to learn the truth about the weapon I had been swinging around in the street, and then Engine told me that Zanka was a pampered child, and he never suspected that anyone would treat him like this. I could only stare at the horrified Zanka as I noticed a pair of boots in the back seat of the car. Engine then told me that their first encounter might not have been the best, but Zanka would be my teacher from now on. He praised Zanka, saying he was the most talented trainer when it came to using life items. Apparently, Zanka took Engine's words to heart, and he started snickering when he heard it. Right then, Engine called the woman named Rio in the back of the car, asking her when she got there. She woke up from her beauty nap and replied that she was curious about the new guy. I could only stare at her because she was quite beautiful. And then Rio suddenly started playing with my hair because it was quite unique, making me wonder if I had accidentally gone to heaven. While I was lost in my thoughts, Engine drove out of the city, leading them to the cleaners' headquarters located in the middle of the wilderness. Engine drove through some ruined cities and arrived at a reinforced tunnel that passed through a huge stone wall. When they came out on the other side, everyone got out of the car and Engine welcomed me to the cleaners' headquarters. I was still in shock from Rio playing with my hair, and as I started walking towards the building, a few flies started buzzing around me. Inside the building, a dark-skinned receptionist was calmly reading a Playboy magazine, and Engine introduced her as Semiyu to me. He said that Semiyu would screen everyone who joined them, but just as he was about to reveal her capabilities, she plunged her nail file into me, killing both flies in one strike. I was speechless at this, and then Semiyu welcomed me, saying that Engine had told her everything about me, but she had to personally screen me to assess my potential. As she began to focus on her glasses, Engine explained that they were her life item, helping to enhance her vision, and if she focused, she could see what a person was made of. This was new information to me, but I didn't have much time to think about it. As Semiyu activated the power of her glasses and looked into my potential, she was shocked by what she saw and quickly deactivated her ability. When Engine asked her what she saw, she told him that I already had a good physique, so I didn't need training in that regard. And I also had a good relationship with my life item, although I needed a little training to use it properly. Engine felt there was more to it, and Semiyu said I had poop stuck to the back of my neck. He started laughing when he heard this, and then decided to take me to meet the boss. But he glanced at Semiyu as he walked because he knew she was hiding something. On the way, Engine told me that there were a total of about 100 cleaners, including warriors, guards, and support. However, they were always dispersed everywhere for their missions, so most of them were not present at headquarters. He told me that I should meet a few of them, and it wouldn't take long. But as soon as he opened the living room door, he saw a group of cleaners there and immediately closed the door again, because they could always be introduced later. They soon arrived at the boss's room, but before entering, Engine told me not to start the conversation by asking how to return to the celestial sphere. He told me that I would need to offer something in exchange for that information, and I should start by promising to work as a cleaner. He also told me not to ask about the boss's life item, because no one knew what it was or what its power was. Now I was curious about the boss, but I found the room empty. Just then, Semiyu arrived and told them that the boss was away on a mission and would not be back for the next few days. I was confused by this, but Engine knew it was normal, and he told me that I needed to wait a few days to meet the boss. I was angry about this and asked what I should do. In the meantime, then Rio suddenly appeared and told me to come watch her work. She said that I couldn't become a cleaner until I was approved by the boss, so the best I could do was go with her as an intern. And that also benefited her because she wanted to know more about me. My brain stopped working because I had never received a woman's attention like this in my life, so I quietly followed her. They went to the strategy room, where Semiyu explained that a small town located near the polluted area had requested help because small trash monsters had been found nearby. I was curious about the polluted areas, and Simu knew that Engine hadn't even properly explained the basics to me. She told me that the ground was divided into safe zones that supported human life, and polluted areas full of trash where trash monsters live. The area where I landed was a wasteland, a particularly dangerous polluted zone, and most people would die the moment they set foot there. Then, she gave me a mask, telling me to wear it at all times when going to polluted areas because, without a mask, I could die from toxic gas in less than 15 minutes. After that, I joined Rio and her team on the mission, and she told me to stay close to her at all times so I could learn the most. I still felt uncomfortable about it, but then I started asking myself how long I had been in the wasteland and how much toxic substance I had inhaled. My attention then shifted to the dump in front of them, and I wondered if the people on the Sky Ark knew that there were humans living at the bottom of the abyss. However, none of that mattered, because the most important thing to me was that very pile of trash. To me, it wasn't just a pile of trash, but a treasure trove where I could find usable things and fix them without anyone scolding me. Then, I caught up to Rio and asked her who the other people with her were. She replied that they were supporters, and even though they didn't have special powers like warriors, they were very useful on missions. One of the supporters reached out his hand to shake mine, and as I nervously took it, the supporter squeezed it with all his might. Rio laughed as I writhed in pain, telling me that this guy had incredible grip strength and could tear off the outer shell of a trash monster with his bare hands. I didn't think I could stand this psycho anymore. When one of the supporters informed everyone that the trash monsters were coming, I decided to observe closely to learn as much as possible. Soon after, a herd of small goat-like trash monsters emerged from the terrifying garbage jungle, and I panicked, asking Rio, how are we supposed to deal with so many enemies? She told me to calm down because they were just weak and slow trash monsters, unable to even get past the wooden fence. Her words proved true as the goat trash monsters attacked the fence and caused no damage. But then suddenly the second wave arrived, and it featured larger and fiercer trash monsters. They started pushing the fence and breaking it, and I panicked, asking Rio what we should do now. She again told me that these monsters were only slightly stronger than the previous ones and were still perfectly suitable for training a newcomer. She said they just needed to clean up quickly and then return to base to hold a welcome party for me to the surface. I couldn't believe she could be so relaxed when she was constantly risking her life fighting monsters. And Rio told me that if I wanted to survive on the surface, I needed to have a positive outlook on the world. I suddenly realized that Engine was the same, and I felt this was what I had been lacking. I also decided to calm down about everything, when suddenly a gigantic trash monster broke through the fence, and even Rio was terrified at the sight of it. I turned to her to confirm that everything was all right, but she told me that this large monster was amazing because she had never seen anything so cool. She said this wasn't the best material for teaching a newcomer, but she would be happy to fight it. She pulled out her scissors, which were her life item, and I could only watch her in stunned silence. Rio then activated her scissors and threw them into the air, where they became gigantic and sharper. She caught them with her feet and then charged towards the monsters, slicing a bunch of them with a kick from the scissors. I couldn't even understand what was happening, and the supporter guide told me that Rio's life item was called the Ripper, and unlike normal people, she used it with her feet. I realized that everyone used their life items in their own way when the handshake guy told me to be more careful of my surroundings. I realized too late that a second-tier trash monster was about to attack me, but luckily, the supporter stopped it with his bare hands before crushing its head and throwing it to Rio, who simply cut it with her scissors. She told the supporters to send a few more trash monsters her way, and they complied, throwing those heavy monsters at her as if they weighed nothing. As I processed all of this and learned that this was how a cleaner fought, Rio had cleared out all the small fries, and only the boss monster remained. Now the supporters decided to incapacitate any small trash monsters that might hinder her fight and spread out. But then I noticed one of the incapacitated monsters had woken up, and it tripped a supporter. It then jumped on him and the man couldn't get away in time. Luckily, I got there to save him and said that I would prove my worth here so I could quickly get the information I wanted. He transformed the iron pipe in his hand into a weapon, and it turned into a barbed barrier. I was confused by this, but then I realized that I had forgotten how to use my power because I had been doing it instinctively all this time. I didn't understand how to deal with this situation, and the trash monster started to bear down on me. Fortunately, Rio arrived just then and quickly dealt with the trash monster, telling me that I did a good thing by following my instincts to save others. The other supporter also arrived and thanked her before asking if she had defeated the large monster yet. Rio said she had sliced it in half, but somehow it was still standing. She didn't understand how it could have survived her attack when she was sure she had hit its core, but she decided to chop it into many small pieces to render it useless. The supporters decided to record information about a new type of trash monster immune to life items, and they left to warn nearby towns about it. Meanwhile, Rio charged towards the gigantic monster, and I was left in limbo because no one told me what to do. Meanwhile, Rio jumped onto the trash monster and landed on its face before leaping over its head and severing all the pipes protruding from it. After making the monster bald, she noticed something glowing beneath her feet, and she realized it must be the core that the monster was trying to hide. However, before she could attack, the trash monster started to move violently enough to throw her off. Then, it reattached the pipes to its head and began slamming its jaw into the ground with great intensity. Rio somehow managed to cling to it, but the monster suddenly directed its attack towards me and the supporters. I just froze as I saw the metal pipes hurtling towards me. But luckily, I wasn't hit directly. The ground beneath my feet was destroyed by the attacks, and as I fell, I started to ask myself what I was doing. I thought that I couldn't get revenge for Regto and those bastards on the Sky Ark at this rate, and darkness began to swallow me. However, the supporter guy arrived to save me from falling into the pit and also from despair. He carried me on his shoulders, telling me that if I had a goal, I shouldn't freeze but rather rush towards it while I still could. He told me to learn from the supporters who had no powers, but they still continued their work. Just then, I noticed Rio slicing the monster again, and based on its scream, she realized that she had found its weak point. She leapt high and then plummeted onto its head with terrifying speed, piercing through it with her scissors and tearing out its core. As she landed on the ground and destroyed the core, the monster suddenly turned to ash. The supporter immediately ran over and asked her how she had defeated the trash monster, and she said she had stabbed something other than its core and it had died. She held a utility knife in her hand and said this was what powered the trash monster. And the supporter guy couldn't believe it, because he realized that the utility knife was actually a life item, and it was completely absurd for a trash monster to have one. Meanwhile, the leader of the bandit group who was planning to sell me suddenly woke up in a dimly lit room. He wondered where he was when suddenly the man sitting on the sofa in front of him asked him for the location of the child from the Sky Ark he had mentioned in his sleep. Back at the cleaner headquarters, Rio threw a welcome party for me, and soon after, Zanka also arrived. Still groggy from his long nap, he asked Rio what was happening, and she told him they were having a party to welcome me to the surface. But I was sitting silently with my head down in a corner. Zanka asked why that bony kid looked so sad, and Rio said that ever since his life item abandoned him in the middle of battle, he had become gloomy and sad. Zanka thought that was sad, but he moved on to the news of Rio facing a strange trash monster. She confirmed, telling him that instead of having a core made of, the trash monster had a life item as its core, and nothing could have prepared them for such a discovery. Rio said that since she couldn't do anything anyway, she decided to leave it to higher authorities and came back to throw a party. Meanwhile, I was still sulking when the support team leader came over to talk to me. He introduced himself as Grizz and then told me that I did very well yesterday. I thought I hadn't done anything, but Grizz reminded me that I had protected another supporter from a trash monster. I said that even though I did that, I then couldn't use my powers properly and needed to be rescued by Grizz and Rio. I felt frustrated because even on the celestial sphere, I often lost control, and Regto had to cover for me afterward. I felt like a complete failure, never able to meet anyone's expectations. But then Grizz suddenly thanked me, completely interrupting my train of thought. He said that most new cleaners treat supporters as losers with no real power. But I was different. Grizz then talked about the guy the first saved. He joined the cleaners group to become a warrior. But since he currently has no life item, he's working as a supporter while cherishing an object, hoping it can become his weapon one day. Grizz told me that I shouldn't think too much about getting stronger or meeting other people's expectations. He asked me what I always wished for, even before things went bad on the celestial sphere. I began to think deeply about it, and Grizz told me that if I could find what ignited the fire in my soul from the very beginning, I would be able to find my path. Then, he patted my head, telling me to believe in myself. I was touched by this, but just then Injin arrived and leaned on me, spoiling the emotional mood. He asked me why I wasn't eating anything, and then Rio and Zanka also arrived. Everyone told me to join the party because I was the star of the night, and also because the food wouldn't last long at this rate. I was deeply moved to see everyone caring about me, and I followed them as everyone was eating. A guy suddenly turned on some music and picked up some spray cans. He started spraying paint on the wall, and Engine told me to watch the guy named Gob closely because he does what he wants without caring about others. While Gob painted his artwork on the wall, the others complained, telling him to wait until they finished eating. But as said before, he didn't care. Meanwhile, on the ground floor, Semyu's mother returned to her desk and she could predict that a call would come at any moment. She picked up the phone the moment it started ringing and received a request. She summoned Zanka and a group of supporters to fulfill the request, but Zanka asked her what Rudo was doing with the group when he hadn't been officially accepted into the cleaners group yet. Semyu told him that the request they received was related to me. She explained that the request came from a merchant who was attacked by a trash monster while passing through a polluted area. He narrowly escaped death, but his valuable cargo was stolen, and now he wants them to defeat the trash monster and retrieve the goods. This is the part where I come in, because the cargo is a living person from the celestial sphere. Everyone was shocked to hear this, and Semyu said that it's very rare to see two living people from the celestial sphere on the ground at the same time, which means something strange is going on and she wants me to look into it myself. I started to think about it, and Gris told me to control my emotions before making a decision. I knew that I couldn't use my powers properly, and that could make me a burden to the team, but I still wanted to meet the other person from the celestial sphere, because it might give me a clue on how to get back to the surface. I decided to go along, and Zanka wasn't really happy about it, but Semyu knew exactly how to make him agree to everything. She said that this task was originally assigned to Engine, but he was busy with another request at the moment, and he said that he trusted Zanka to do it. That was enough to activate Engine's #1 fanboy, and he happily led his team through the polluted area. On the way, I asked Gris if he carried a weapon, and he replied that he had a knife, but he trusted his hands more than that. One of the supporters told me that Gris actually had an amulet he prayed to a lot, and he was ashamed that his secret had been revealed. Finally, he decided to show me the amulet, saying it was nothing special, but it gave him something to cling to. Just then, they noticed a strange guy standing behind them. The girl with the definite pronoun, fam, said that she was the merchant who hired them for this mission. I suddenly started asking her questions about the person from the celestial sphere, and the merchant replied that she was transporting luggage when she accidentally ran into an unconscious person from the celestial sphere. She was worried about them, so she took them with her. But then the trash monster attacked them and kidnapped the person from the celestial sphere. I questioned the merchant if she intended to sell the person from the celestial sphere, and she denied the accusation, telling me that she didn't want to, and was just genuinely curious about the person from the celestial sphere. Zanka felt this story was garbage, just like the place they were heading. Trash monsters are known to attack humans on sight, and they don't take detours to kidnap someone. He thought something was suspicious, but decided to deal with it when the time came. The merchant then led them to the building where the trash monster ran into, after kidnapping the person from the celestial sphere. Zanka told everyone to be vigilant, because the trash monster could attack them from any direction. But when they entered the building, they found it empty except for a person at the other end. The merchant said it was the person from the celestial sphere, and began pushing me towards them, and the other cleaners were pushed along too. When they got close enough, I realized that it wasn't a person but a doll dressed like the person from the celestial sphere. But it was too late as the merchant jumped back, telling them to hurry. Immediately after, the ground beneath my feet turned to mud, and the entire group fell to the floor below. They wondered what had just happened, and the merchant asked if they were okay. They told her they were fine, and asked where they were and where the person from the celestial sphere was. The merchant laughed sinisterly and pointed at me, saying that I was the person from the celestial sphere before suddenly turning into mud and melting away. Just then, they heard two voices calling for the giver from the celestial sphere, and then a pair of purple lights began to approach them from the darkness. Now Zanka understood everything, especially because of the purple electric lights. He knew that those who ambushed them were called thieves, and they didn't even bother to hide that they planned to snatch me from the cleaners. I was confused about this new, strange group, and Gris told me that they were the thieves of this world. But what made them dangerous was the fact that they were all givers. He immediately ordered his group to find an exit while he and Fola would protect me. He asked Zanka to handle the two thieves himself, and although reluctant, he knew there was no other choice. The supporters ran in the opposite direction, and Gris told me to follow them. I said that I could handle a group of thieves myself, but Gris warned me not to underestimate the thieves, especially when they didn't know about their ability. On the other hand, Zanka scoffed at the thieves, saying he always knew they'd be after me, but he never thought they'd sniff me out so soon. He asked if they intended to sell me, as a living person from the celestial sphere could give them enough money to retire in luxury. The thieves laughed, saying they had no intention of selling me. Instead, they were genuinely curious about the celestial sphere, and talking to a person from there was the best source of knowledge. They wanted to know many things, especially how I managed to cross the barrier without dying. Now, Zanka was also curious about the barrier, but he decided to quickly deal with the thieves. He said that since they had orchestrated this whole thing, he didn't need to worry about a trash monster. The female thief replied that he still had to worry about the mud dolls she could create at will. And Zanka said that he could handle weak opponents like these even with his eyes closed. He suddenly activated his staff and began destroying the mud dolls. But the male thief hid among the mannequins and attacked him from behind. Zanka barely reacted to his attack and was slammed into a pillar. The man once again retreated into a mud doll. And the female thief told Zanka that since cleaners only fight trash monsters, they don't know how to deal with humans. She told him that this would be the last hide-and-seek game he'd ever play in his life, and he was ready to fight with everything he had. He continued to take down the mud dolls, but the male thief was still able to land continuous blows on his back. Zanka was now cornered, and as he tried to rush towards the female thief to defeat her, his feet slipped in the puddle of mud she had created earlier. She told him that he was the only warrior in the group who could fight against her, and once he fell, the rest of the group would be defenseless. She said he would soon be defeated, but then Zanka suddenly yelled at her, telling her to start a podcast if she wanted to ramble so much. He said that at first he thought she was controlling the mud puppets with her shovel, and the other guy was using his life item to deal damage. However, after observing the battle for a while, he realized that his initial assumption was wrong. He said that the man was just punching him, and his life item seemed to be skis that allowed him to move easily on stable ground. He said that it now made sense why he could move so easily even though the ground was covered in mud, and he scoffed at the two thieves, calling them a match made in heaven. This suddenly enraged the woman, and she told him to shut up, which he clearly did not. He said that he might not have experience fighting humans, but he knew his life item much better than them. He said that was why he could do things they couldn't, and the girl suddenly attacked him. Zanka slammed his staff down, creating a sound wave that spread everywhere. He could feel the changes in the vibrations as the sound waves passed through the mud dolls, and when it hit the doll where the male bandit was hiding, he immediately found him. Then, he rushed forward at full speed, knocking him down with one blow before hitting the female bandit as well. When she was unconscious, her mud dolls immediately disintegrated, and Zanka said they were just a bunch of dim chickens. However, the leader of the bandits suddenly appeared behind him, saying that he should fight someone stronger if he was not satisfied. On the other hand, I and the others were still running as they tried to find a way out. I started to worry because I could no longer hear the fighting, when I suddenly bumped into Gris, who had found an exit. He sent some support upstairs so they could contact headquarters and call for backup. Then, he decided to go back and check on Zanka, when he suddenly heard someone running towards them. Gris thought it was Zanka who had finished his fight, but surprisingly, the bandit leader arrived there. Everyone was confused, and then the bandit started staring at me and comparing my features to the description he had received from the bandit he had kidnapped earlier. He suddenly jumped onto the wall behind me and clung to it like Spider-Man, saying that he had finally found the giver from the heavens. As soon as Gris and the others realized that the man in front of them was a bandit, he crushed the wall with his claws, blocking the exit. The bandit began to draw attention, and Gris told him that if he harmed me, he would become the enemy of all cleaners. Then he asked him about Zanka, but the bandit began talking about how late he was getting there, because he had a terrible sense of direction. When he arrived, the others had already been defeated, and he didn't like that because it was a waste of everyone's time. Then he walked towards me, completely ignoring Gris and his questions about Zanka. He told me that someone really wanted to talk to me, so I should go with the bandits right now. I was on high alert when the bandit suddenly grabbed my mask and pulled it off, telling me that I didn't need it because there were no trash monsters around. I asked him what happened to the cleaner with the staff, and the bandit said that he had a bad attitude, so he dealt with him. However, since he was strong, he didn't kill him, but only knocked him out. But he might not like the poison very much. The bandit then used his ability to awaken the power of the rings, turning them into metal claws. He told me to come with him peacefully and no one would get hurt. But just then, Gris and Folo attacked him. The bandit easily dodged their attacks, and then performed a reverse kick to send them flying. He sensed that Folo had the potential to become a giver, but Gris had nothing similar, so he was not necessary. However, Gris stood up and told the bandit that he would protect his team at all costs, no matter who he had to fight. The bandit realized that he was a supporter, and told him that weaklings like him were worthless, and they couldn't protect anything. I was worried about Gris and told him to back off because the fight would be too dangerous for him, but Gris didn't answer. Instead, it was the bandit who told me that my weak and useless friend was dead. His claws had pierced Gris's heart, and he pushed them deeper until they passed through the other side. I could only watch in horror as Gris's lucky charm flew off, and my mind went completely blank. This scene was exactly like Regto's death to me, and I instinctively put my hand on my pendant, which brought back my childhood memories. One day, Regto saw me banging my head against the wall, and he immediately came to stop me. He asked me what the hell I was doing, and I answered blankly that Regto had told me to stop hurting others, but he had never said anything about not hurting myself. Regto became more worried because he thought I had become calmer after the pain in my hand had subsided. He asked me the reason for the agitation, and I replied that there was no reason. I just had an inexplicable anger inside me that I didn't know the cause of. But Regto knew what was happening. He realized that I felt abandoned by my parents, which created a sense of uselessness in me, and that had given rise to this anger. Regto told me that I needed a purpose in life to overcome that feeling, or at least things I liked. So he bandaged me up and took me to experience different things, from books, games, to cooking. But nothing really caught my attention much. However, just as Regto was about to end the day, I saw a man throwing away trash and my curiosity was aroused. I opened the gate leading to the main city and pulled out a mask from the trash bag. Regto followed me because he was worried. But then I suddenly burst into tears because I could empathize with the trash. Regto asked me how I felt now, and I told him that this mask was only slightly damaged and should not be thrown away. I cried and said that it was unfair to throw it away when it still had so much life and I wanted to fix it. Regto realized that this was more than just a projection of my problems and that I could genuinely see the value in things others threw away. Back in the present, the pendant transformed into a sentient item in my hand, and the bandit was shocked by it. Gris, who was somehow still alive, now realized the truth about my power. He said that I didn't turn everything into sentient items, but that I revealed their untapped potential. With that, I awakened the potential of the pendant, turning it into a formidable, sentient weapon. The bandit was genuinely surprised by this, and he started drooling as he asked me, "What can your sentient item do?" On the other hand, Folo put Gris in a more comfortable position, but he was still in critical condition. I thanked Gris for showing me the way out of my depression, and told him that, without his help, I would still be stuck. However, now I know what I should do, and I will start by kicking the bandit's ass and proving him wrong about everything he just said. The bandit liked my attitude and finally introduced himself as Jabber, saying that he liked nothing more than determined warriors and powerful givers. Then, he attacked me, and we both lunged into a serious fight. On the other hand, Gris was still bleeding, and Folo was worried about him. However, Gris reassured him that he would be fine. Then, he started thinking about me and said that I had not been able to use my power correctly last time because there were so many emotions clouding my true purpose. But this time, they didn't have to worry about that. Meanwhile, I was entirely on the defensive, forcing Jabber to attack me and retreat when he found no openings. He tried to provoke me into attacking, but I simply told him to attack me if he dared. Jabber told me to lighten up a bit and enjoy the fight as he lunged at me again, but I just dodged his attack. Jabber attacked me again, and this time I also easily dodged. Jabber soon realized that his attacks couldn't even hit me, who explained that it was thanks to Gris's pendant. Gris had prayed over the charm that everyone would return safely after their mission, and that meant it was a sentient item focused on defense. Jabber understood that it increased the rate of guaranteed evasion, but he told me that I couldn't counterattack with this sentient item. I told him it wasn't necessary, confusing the bandit. I explained that I had dodged everything without moving from my position, and that it was Jabber who was constantly moving, so I could predict where he would move next. Jabber didn't really care about my bragging and he lunged at me again. However, this time I used another ability of my weapon, which slightly altered Jabber's trajectory, but it was enough to completely throw him off his loop. I said that I couldn't use the charm to attack, but I could use my fists, and then rocked Jabber's world with a powerful punch to his face. Jabber turned out to be a masochist, and he was happy that I had finally attacked him. He complained that it was unfair that the game was rigged against him, but I felt no guilt in using my sentient item to beat him to a pulp after throwing him off balance. Jabber decided to change tactics and attacked me from behind, but the charm still broke his momentum and gave me an opportunity to land a critical blow to his stomach. Jabber changed his fighting style again after that, messing up the surrounding environment to create a dust cloud that obscured my vision. Now I was on high alert, and then suddenly a brick flew towards me. I dodged it thanks to the power of the charm, but then Jabber chopped a pillar and threw more bricks at me. I dodged them all, and just then Jabber attacked me from my blind spot. Luckily, the charm was ready for that, and it disrupted his movement again, allowing me to slam him to the ground. Jabber got up and decided to unleash his full speed, but even that was not enough to defeat me, who had unlocked Ultra Instinct thanks to the charm, and I could hit Jabber whenever he got close to me. I completely thrashed him and forced him to use a wall to prop himself up, but Jabber started laughing because it had been a long time since he had received such a high-quality beating. Then, he told me that it was good that I got to enjoy attacking him, because I wouldn't be able to do that anymore. By now, Jabber had realized that the talisman detected any attack with hostile intent and moved them out of my way, keeping me safe. But as he threw rubble towards me through the smoke, he discovered that the talisman was completely unresponsive to it. I didn't understand why he was suddenly bragging about it, and then Jabber told me that his right claw contained a powerful neurotoxin. He suddenly stabbed himself with the claw, and I became even more confused about his motives. Jabber told me that he would now lose consciousness and then go berserk randomly, and he was sure that my talisman would not consider it hostile intent. He asked me to dodge that blow and then gradually fell asleep. I could only look at him with disgust and shock. But then Jabber suddenly woke up and, just as he said, began attacking wildly. Jabber went into a berserker rage as he stood up while still unconscious and let out an ear-splitting howl. I could only watch him in amazement as Jabber suddenly rushed towards me, spinning rapidly and destroying everything in his path. I somehow dodged the attack, and I couldn't understand how Jabber could be so strong even in this state. Suddenly, I noticed Folo and Grizz were not too far from their position, and if Jabber turned towards them, they would both die. So I ran in the opposite direction to lure Jabber, and my gamble paid off. Berserk Jabber attacked me, and I tried to use the talisman's power to stop him. However, it didn't go as I intended, and I had to block the attack myself before throwing the berserker away with a judo move. Despite hitting his head on the concrete floor, Jabber was still as bloodthirsty as before, and I thought that battle experience and determination could make people do impossible things. However, another idea suddenly popped into my head, and I thought that Jabber might be a masochist. I recalled a time when I was beaten up by bullies on the Celestial Sphere, but I didn't fight back because Regto told me not to. The kids asked me if I was a masochist, but at the time I didn't know what that meant, so I went home and asked Regto about it. Now that I knew masochists were psychos who enjoyed pain, I figured if Jabber really was one of them, I didn't know how to stop it. Anyway, Jabber charged at me in his mindless rage, and I could only try to dodge his attacks. I kept backing away, trying to block and evade the blows, but Jabber was too strong for me. He managed to pierce my defenses, but just as his claw was about to strike me, Zanka's staff flew in and pinned him to the ground. I recognized the staff, and right then Zanka arrived, struggling to stand upright, but determined to get revenge on the bastard who had left their fight unfinished without fully defeating him. I asked him if he was strong enough to fight, but Zanka told me not to underestimate him. Then, he noticed the life item I was using and commented that I finally seemed to have gotten a hang of it. I replied that it was useless, since it couldn't block Jabber's attacks in his mindless state. Zanka understood that the life item only reacted to hostile intent, and I was surprised that he had realized that. Zanka said that while he was struggling to get here, he had seen me fighting from afar and decided to learn my fighting style, as it would help in teaching me later. Zanka said that since I couldn't fight with my life item, and he couldn't move well due to the poison, they had no way to defeat Jabber. However, he had an idea, and he asked me to let him attack me once. I was shocked by the proposal, but Zanka explained that since he couldn't move, my life item could detect his hostile intent and move him to where he wanted. That way, he could get close to Jabber and defeat him, since I had no option to attack him anyway. I asked what would happen if my life item wasn't activated, and Zanka told me to man up and take the hit in that case. Just then, Jabber woke up, and both were ready to face him. He lunged at them, slashing at the pillar they were standing near, but both managed to escape safely. Zanka told me that the claw had even scratched me, as it would quickly paralyze me. He was angry about it and decided to attack me to vent his frustration. Fortunately, the talisman worked just as he thought, and it moved him straight towards Jabber, allowing him to send the bastard flying. Zanka was impressed by this, but I was angry with him. Since the talisman had deflected the attack, it meant Zanka had attacked me with hostile intent, but he claimed it was just a small test. After that, he walked back to me and said that they could work with this team. He positioned himself to attack me again, and at the same time, Jabber stood up. He charged towards them, and then Zanka attacked me, my ability throwing him forward. He once again got close to Jabber and delivered a critical blow. Zanka was surprised that the talisman could be controlled so well by me and that I could send him quite far. Then, he attacked me again, and I sent him towards Jabber once more. Thanks to my control, Zanka unleashed a critical combo that brought him back to his senses. When Jabber saw Zanka in front of him, he was a little excited, but the next thing he felt was Zanka's staff landing on his head, knocking him out once and for all. When Zanka landed on his feet afterward, he stumbled and fell to the ground. He thought they had won the fight, and I also relaxed a bit, causing the talisman to deactivate. It suddenly turned to dust and crumbled as if Thanos had just snapped his fingers to make it disappear, and I panicked. I tried to save the talisman because it belonged to Gris, but I could do nothing but watch it fly away. I started to panic, and Zanka wondered if the talisman was destroyed because of my ability, or if something else was going on here. However, I blamed myself, and I suddenly had a mental breakdown, which turned into a physical collapse as I fell to the ground, writhing like a fish out of water. Zanka saw the claw marks on my back and realized that I had been attacked by Jabber, without either of them knowing. Just then, he noticed Jabber was stabbing himself with his left claw, and he suddenly stood up perfectly fine. He looked around and said that he must have done a great job while he was unconscious, and then advanced towards me. Zanka asked him to stop and questioned how he could move despite such serious injuries, and Jabber paused to monologue about his abilities. He said that his left claw contained a powerful painkiller that relieved him of all pain and allowed him to function normally again. Then, he said that the poison from his right claw would probably take effect on Zanka within 30 minutes. So, he decided to give him another dose to make sure he didn't get in his way. Zanka was helpless as Jabber stabbed him, leaving him struggling on the ground. Then, he walked over to me, still twitching, and picked me up to take me to their base. This time, Zanka couldn't even yell at him to stop, and he could only silently watch me being taken away. Meanwhile, Jabber was happy to have completed his mission, and he didn't even care about his two unconscious teammates lying in the building. I was still conscious, though unable to move, and I blamed myself for putting everyone in danger. Just then, Jabber jumped out of the hole in the floor that his teammates had created, but instead of being in a building, he found himself outside. He thought that couldn't be possible because he remembered the map clearly. But just then he saw Rio waiting for him. Engine was also with her, and Jabber discovered that when he was stabbed in the stomach by Engine's umbrella and slammed into a wall with immense force, he somehow remained conscious despite that, and noticed that Engine had other formidable cleaners with her. It turned out that the support personnel who had escaped earlier had called for backup, and Engine and the others were close enough to arrive in time. One of the support personnel was worried that Gris and the others might be dead, but Engine assured her that they were strong and wouldn't die so easily. He asked her to form a team and rescue them. And meanwhile, Jabber started yelling that they looked very strong, and he wasn't strong enough to fight them. Just thinking about how helpless he was excited him. And Engine was shocked to learn that I had been fighting this eccentric masochist all this time. Rio commented that he looked better than she expected, and the other cleaners pitied him, saying that he looked much worse than they thought. The big guy got angry and said that it was unforgivable for someone to try to harm one of their teammates, but the other guy told him to shut up because he was annoying. Then, Engine told Jabber that they were going to capture him and interrogate him. He asked him if he really thought he could mess with the cleaners, and then crawl back into whatever hole he crawled out of. Jabber became even more excited upon hearing this, and asked if they intended to lock him up for life, where he would have to come up with his own escape plan. He stood up and said that he knew he would lose, but he had orders to bring me back, and he wouldn't go back to face defeat even if he had to die in the process. He awakened his weapon again, but just as he was about to charge forward, someone hugged him from behind and told him to stop. Jabber recognized the short person as one of his teammates and told her to leave him alone because he still had a mission to complete. She told him that time was up, and there was nothing they could do because the cleaners were already here. Jabber was still determined to complete his task, so the girl told him that the boss had a very radiant smile. Jabber suddenly stopped, and the girl tightened her arms around him to hold him back. Finally, he decided to listen to her and go home, and as he stepped aside, the mysterious gate on the wall behind him became clear. Jabber told everyone that he had to go now, and asked them to send his regards to me because I must have been brought down by his poison by now. However, I was still conscious and I used all my strength to stand up and tell Jabber to stop because their fight was not over yet. Jabber was impressed by my persistence, and I told him that I would pay him back for what he had done to Gris and others. Jabber was pleased to hear that and said that they would fight another time, but then he noticed my gloves and the unique design on them. He excitedly remarked that their boss would be delighted to know that Rudo had something from the special collection number 2 and then stepped into the gate behind the short girl. As soon as he closed the sewer lid, the gate disappeared, and everyone was surprised. After that, Zanka and the others were rescued from the building, and the poison also wore off on my body. I immediately ran to Gris and saw that he was still alive despite serious blood loss. I apologized to him for ruining his talisman, and Gris said that he really cared about it. I was about to sink into guilt, but then Gris said that if his talisman had helped me, then that was truly for the best. With that, the last pieces of the talisman also flew away, and I wasn't sure how I felt at that moment. Soon after, everyone returned to the sweepers' headquarters and I sat alone in silence. Injin came there and asked me why I was acting like a depressed emo kid when I should be happy that I had finally learned how to use my life item. I suddenly lashed out at him and said that I couldn't save Gris earlier, and I couldn't be happy about that. I said that I had failed to protect Regto in the sky, and on the ground, I had failed to protect the person who saved my life. I felt like a failure no matter what I did, and Injin told me that Gris knew what he was getting into and was always prepared for the risks. Then he asked me to come with him so they could pay their respects to Gray, who, surprisingly, was still alive. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw Gris sitting upright and thanking me for what happened earlier. And Injin finally realized that I was depressed because I thought Gris had died. He started patting my head, and a nurse also decided to join in, just for fun. I was embarrassed, but I asked Gris how he could have survived, despite being stabbed straight through the heart by a poisonous claw. Gris told me that it was all thanks to the sweepers' medical team, and especially the young medic named Aisha, the only giver they had with healing abilities. However, Aisha was quite shy and had self-esteem issues, so she needed constant reassurance from Gris to trust him. Then Gris turned to Folo, who had kept him alive while he was bleeding, and Folo knelt. Finally, he turned to me and thanked me for stopping Jabber along with Zanka. He also told me not to worry about the talisman, because if it helped save a few lives, it had done its job well. This time, I believed him, and I told Gris that I was truly glad to see him alive. With that, Injin said that now they had to worry about the bandits waging war on them, besides the garbage monsters. But fortunately, they had gotten some information from them. Just then, a tall, dark-skinned cleaner came there talking about the border that Jabber had mentioned, and I asked Injin who this new guy was. Injin replied that it was the boss, and I panicked because I was not mentally ready to meet him. The boss greeted me and introduced himself as Corvus. He said that at first he intended to reject me when he heard that I wanted to join them, just to get information about going to the sky. However, because I risked my life to protect the sweepers, I am now one of them, and Corvus has no objection to accepting me as an official cleaner. Corvus then called me to his office to get my uniform, as well as to learn more about the border. He explained that the border separates the ground from the sky, and anyone who tries to cross it will die. However, there are exceptions to this rule. Corvus began to tell a story about a woman who lived in a wasteland nearest to the border. Once upon a time, a young man got lost there and met the woman. He asked her why she lived in such a desolate place, and she replied that she was observing people falling from above. The woman told him that some people came and crossed the border without dying, and that was their only clue now. I realized that if I found one of the people the woman had seen crossing the border, I could return home. Corvus told me that it would be an extremely dangerous journey, but I didn't care about that because I had to return home at all costs. However, I was a bit too excited about it and immediately started rushing to the wasteland. Volo tried to stop me, but he wasn't strong enough to hold me back. Fortunately, Injin came there and made me stop, telling me that I couldn't go to the wasteland with such meager preparation. He said that it was good that I could use my abilities on command now, but they still didn't know about my limits and weaknesses. I asked him to come with me in that case, but Injin refused because he wasn't crazy enough to go alone into the wasteland again. I knew that was a lie, because Injin actually went alone when he found me. Anyway, Injin told me that the time would come when they would go to dangerous territory, but for now, they should focus on training me, researching the garbage monsters, and also finding more information about the bandits. Speaking of the bandits, I asked Injin how thieves like them could be givers. Injin replied that being a good person and treating items carefully was not a prerequisite. Those who can take good care of their items and awaken their power become givers, even if they are the dregs of society. He added that there were people who hated all kinds of givers, because from a normal person's perspective, anyone overly attached to just one item would look very strange. Then, Injin told me to rest today because I had been in constant action recently. I obeyed his command and tried to rest in my room, But with ADHD occupying 90% of my pea-sized brain, I couldn't even relax. I started wondering if I should sneak out and go look for something valuable in the junk pile. Suddenly, Rio kicked open my door because she had no intention of letting me rest. She decided to give me a tour of their headquarters, and I said that this place had more things than the sky. Rio was curious about the sky and asked me what I did up there. I told her my usual routine was picking up trash and getting scolded. And then Rio asked about the food in the sky. I replied that there were things like bread and soup, but when she asked me about sweets, I became irritable because only the rich could afford sweets. Rio told me that they had sweets here, and I couldn't believe it until I saw them. I felt like I had found the one-piece treasure when I saw a plate full of sweets, and then Engine warned me that sweets were more addictive than drugs, so I should be careful when eating them. Then he explained that due to surface pollution, they couldn't grow many food crops, but there was a group called binders who gathered givers specializing in cooking. They were the ones who made and sold these sweets, and sweets were not really rare on the ground because of them. Well, I trembled and took a bite, and as soon as I tasted sweets for the first time, I felt like I was enlightened. I started devouring the sweets like a madman. An Engine thought they had a budding new sugar addict among them. Just then, a strange guy with a pacifier in his mouth came there and started staring at me, and I wondered if he was also after the sweets. I didn't want to share anything, but I forced myself to give a candy to the weird guy, who just snatched it from my hand and gave an attitude. I didn't really mind him much and continued eating sweets until I had a strange reaction and turned into a balloon, scaring Zanka. Anyway, once I had digested all the sweets and returned to normal, it was time for my training to begin. But I couldn't harness the power of the knife I was holding. Rio and Engine laughed at me, asking if I had forgotten how to access my power after the sugar rush. But Zanka was thinking logically. He felt that since I liked fixing broken items, I needed some kind of broken item to activate their power. He immediately gathered some things from the local junkyard and asked me if anything here felt right. I immediately picked up a broken triangular object and used my power to turn it into some kind of weapon. Everyone was impressed by Zanka's deduction, and he was very proud when Engine praised him. Then, he asked me to try activating other objects at the same time, and I managed to transform 2 other items into weapons. However, I suddenly got a severe nosebleed and collapsed, and Engine remarked that he had seen that on the day they first met. He said that perhaps the quality of my gloves was so high that my body couldn't keep up. I asked him what quality was, and Engine explained that the longer an item was cared for, the stronger it became, and the higher its quality. High-quality items were more powerful, but they also drained more energy. Zanka agreed, and he thought that if I had taken care of my gloves since I was young, they would definitely be of high quality. However, he also wondered if it had anything to do with the collection Jabber mentioned. Meanwhile, I wondered why the weapons I activated eventually turned to dust. I said that the current items were perfectly fine and wondered if there was a time limit. However, Rio had a different hypothesis. She suggested that the items might disappear because they had fulfilled their purpose. She said that my power was to repair and unleash the full potential of things others had discarded. In doing so, I give items a chance to fulfill their purpose, and once they are done, they disappear. Zanka also agreed with this idea, saying that Griss's charm only disappeared after the battle ended, and I felt safe. Engine also liked this hypothesis, and he told me that I wasn't destroying charms or any other items I had used. Instead, he wanted me to think of it as giving discarded and broken items one last chance to shine brightly. I finally realized that my power was not to destroy things, but to give them a chance to shine. Just then, Rio asked me about the items in the collection that Jabber had mentioned, and I began to wonder if there were many items like my gloves. Rio then asked me if my gloves had a name, and I was confused by the question. Rio told me that when you love something, you give it a name. Her scissors were called the Shredder, Engine's umbrella was called Unbreaker, and Zanka called his staff Lovely Assist Staff. I was surprised to hear all of this, and then Engine told me to come up with a good name for my gloves soon. That night, I was washing my gloves, and when I came out of the bathroom, I was shocked to see Rio lying on my bed. I was completely stunned and asked her what she was doing here. Rio replied that her room was directly upstairs, so she could hear me groaning and complaining. She was worried about me and had used the window to enter my room. I now understood the situation, and Rio asked if I was in pain because the wounds on my hands looked terrible. I immediately hid my hands from her and told her that they hurt much less when I wore gloves, but I had to wash them frequently. Rio asked me where the wounds came from because they looked even worse than burns. I said she needed to ask my birth parents about that, and Rio understood what I meant. She said that parents give us many things, with psychological trauma being at the top of the list. The next day, Injin took me to meet the boss, who said that since there was still a bit of time to prepare a full mask for me, Injin should finish the remaining preparations. I was confused by this, and Injin told me that a full mask was the mask that all cleaners were ordered to wear when they entered the wasteland. He took out his mask to show me, and then said that they had an artist among them who specialized in making these masks. But he was an eccentric with extreme ADHD. Therefore, he couldn't work if anyone even mentioned a deadline in front of him. He was currently making a mask for me, and it seemed he would take his time. Corvus said that while waiting, they would complete the preparations by casting a spell on me. This confused me even more. So the motherly receptionist explained that there were many uncertainties in the garbage areas, and to ensure the cleaners were lucky enough to avoid them, they had another artist who would draw a protective charm on them. The boss had allowed him to draw anything he wanted, so sometimes he would draw around the headquarters, but recently he seemed busy in another city. Injin said that he would go to Canvas Town to find the artist, and he would bring a whole team with him. The team included Zanka and Rio, as well as Gris and Folo, along with some people from Engin's team. He introduced each person to me and said that usually they would bring 5 support members, but because the wasteland was more dangerous, they would only bring 3 elite support members and increase the number of givers. Just then, the big guy named Delma arrived, and I was intimidated by his size. Delma suddenly started yelling at me, saying that he had heard my life story, and he felt angry that the people on the celestial sphere discriminated between humans. He declared his fondness for passionate people like me and tried to recruit me into his group. But just then, his teammate Tamsi arrived and stopped him. He said that since Jin had recruited me to his side, they shouldn't try to steal me. Just then, Injin joined the fun and asked Delma to give one of his characteristic passionate speeches. As Delma gnashed his teeth, Zanka covered his ears just in time before the giant began a speech about how they would never give up despite the challenges they faced. His passion was infectious, and after a moment of confusion, even I joined the other yelling people. However, once they got into the car to go to Canvas Town, everyone became quiet. Soon after, their destination appeared, and I was mesmerized when I saw it because it looked like an art project even from a distance. When they arrived at the city gates, I noticed that all the walls had graffiti on them, but I was more curious about the dome-like structure. Tamsi told me that most cities had some kind of dome to protect them from space debris because it was enough to kill people. I felt bad about that, but Tamsi told me not to feel guilty because it was the fault of the people who littered. At the same time, 2 men at the gate were trying to enter the city, but they found that they couldn't enter the gate even though it was wide open. They kept hitting an invisible wall, but then Injin and his team walked through the gate normally. The other 2 were surprised by this, and so was I, but Injin told me to just walk through the gate, because if I had no ill intentions in my mind, the gate wouldn't stop me. I immediately walked through the gate, realizing that the 2 guys stuck outside were some kind of hoodlums. Anyway, when they entered the city, I saw even more graffiti and empty paint cans scattered everywhere. Injin told me that many people on the surface liked to draw, but most people didn't respect their art. It was rumored that Canvas Town was created so that artists could draw anywhere they wanted. I asked if they were here to see these paintings, and Injin told me that they were here to find the giver who could cast protective spells on anything with their art. I was confused by that. So Injin gave me an example. He said that if the giver wanted to protect a wall from an attack, he could infuse his emotions into the animated object and then convert them into magic by drawing on the wall. Then, he said that the 2 people outside couldn't enter the city because the giver had drawn a spell forbidding those with evil intentions from entering the city. I said that his power seemed truly insane, and Injin remarked that his animated object was quite rare. He was trying to explain that the giver had actually inherited the animated object from someone when a child came running, bumped into him, and fell to the ground. He tried to help the child up, but it started crying and then ran away. Injin was stunned by this, and Rio began to tease him about making the child cry. Just then, the mayor of the city also arrived, and Injin was very happy to see him. He said that they had come here to meet their friend Gob because they had a job for him. He asked him where he was working now, but the mayor told him with a heavy heart that Gob had passed away this morning. The mayor then took everyone to Gob's house, saying that he had died from body pollution. He was not satisfied with painting in the city, and he had gone to polluted areas to paint. The mayor was sure that Gob often forgot his mask when he was painting, and as a result, the deadly air had destroyed his body from the inside. Injin was heartbroken by this news, and as he paid his respects to his late friend, I remembered that I had once seen Gob paint a wall at the headquarters. At that time, Injin had said many good things about him, that he was a person who was never distracted from what he wanted to do. I was stunned trying to accept Gob's death, but Tamsy told me not to be too shocked because many people on the surface died from body pollution. The mayor said that Gob had decided on his successor before he died, and that was the child named Remlin, whom Injin had bumped into earlier. He talked about how sorcerers were previously chosen by the previous brush wielder, and they immediately transformed into givers upon receiving the brush. However, he felt this responsibility was too great for young Remlin because sorcerers were like representatives of their city. I was shocked to learn this. But Folo and Tamsy told me that passing on an animated object was very rare. But it made sense because the animated object's power had already been awakened, and the recipient only needed to have the potential to become a giver. The mayor then said that Remlin and Gob were like brothers, so they would need to give the children some time to recover from the loss. He told Injin that he and his cleaner friends would be delayed because of that. But Injin told him that they didn't need to rush in such a delicate situation. The mayor suddenly burst into tears, saying that Gob had painted with too much joy in his heart, and he couldn't believe he was dead. Injin understood his emotions very well because he had always been amazed every time he saw Gob paint with a radiant smile on his face. He decided they would come back after things had settled down. But before leaving, he asked Remlin to take care of herself. However, she suddenly stood up, declaring that the dark times were over. That startled everyone, and Remlin immediately snatched the brush from the mayor's hand and ran out. Everyone followed her and found her on a rooftop with paint cans. She said that even though she was sad Gob had died, she knew he couldn't enjoy the afterlife if he saw everyone crying behind him. That's why she wanted to send him off the way he most wanted, and that was by celebrating life and art. She immediately activated the brush, making it expand and drawing a magic circle on the ground, turning the paint cans into firework launchers. As the paint cans shot colorful fireworks into the sky, everyone in the city was inspired and rushed to create art. Remlin was happy to see that, as it was what Gob wanted, and I watched her in awe. Soon after, Remlin painted her latest artwork on my face, and she was really proud of it. She had made me up as a clown, and I wasn't really happy about it, but Remlin couldn't stop laughing looking at my face. While I was fuming at her, Injin talked to the mayor, saying that now they knew the exact criteria the mages used to choose a successor. The mayor confirmed and said that Remlin was as erratic as Gob. Injin asked him how many mages there had been in total, and the mayor replied that Remlin was probably the 6th, because mages only left their history through art. Meanwhile, Remlin introduced herself to me and asked me what and where I wanted her to paint. She started talking about her power and how it didn't work well if she wasn't allowed to paint in a place. Injin recalled that Gob was the same, and he asked the mayor if all mages wielded the same power. The mayor replied that they had similar powers, but sometimes there were differences. Injin thought that the item gave them the same power, and the differences arose due to differences in the mage's personality. But Remlin said he was wrong. She believed that their powers turned out to be similar because they were all eccentric folks who liked to play on the battlefield. She said that they painted balloons and flowers in intense battle scenes because they liked the message of freedom and power in their artwork. She believed this was the decisive factor whenever a mage chose their successor. But Injin didn't understand most of what she said. He concluded that mages had the same power because they thought in the same way. But Remlin disagreed with that too. She said they had different ways of thinking, and they also painted different things, which confused Injin even more. He tried to understand exactly what Remlin meant, but the mayor stopped him, telling him that he would just lose his mind if he tried to argue with an artist or a flat earther. Anyway, I told Remlin that I wanted her to paint something on my back to protect me from a serious blow. Remlin was ready for the job and immediately transformed her brush into a tattoo gun to make her artwork permanent. The mayor and Injin were shocked by this because they initially thought Remlin had just found a tattoo gun somewhere, but it turned out she could transform the brush into any tool that met her needs at the time. Finally, they stopped her from tattooing the enchantment on my body, but Remlin said that if she only painted with original watercolor, it would wash off after my first shower. However, she quickly came up with another idea that was just as mischievous as a tattoo, and asked my permission to enchant my body without telling me what tool she would use. Anyway, Remlin drew an enchantment not only on me, but on everyone in the group, and with that, they decided to get back to their mission. Remlin was really exhausted after enchanting 9 people at once, but she still went with them to the gate. At the gate, Injin and the others discovered 2 previous losers, and they were angry to see the brush in Remlin's hand. They asked the mayor how he could let a child like her inherit the mage's position, and said that they were more suitable to become the next mage. One of them boasted about winning a famous art competition to prove his worth, and that he could be a better mage than a snot-nosed kid. The mayor suddenly yelled at them and immediately silenced them. He told them that fakes like them only cared about fame, and that they didn't even understand what it meant to be a mage. He told them to run away immediately because no one in Canvas City wanted to see their ugly faces. The thugs quickly accepted defeat before the angry mayor and returned in disappointment. Engine remarked that the mayor was as scary as ever when he got angry and told him to stay away from the gate as it wasn't good for his blood pressure. With that, everyone got into the vehicle, and I thanked RN for painting on me. She smiled smugly and told me that she would also come to headquarters soon to play. Engine drove them off with that, and I realized that they would be returning to the main headquarters. Engine affirmed, but he told me that before they reached their base to get masks, I would be in for a surprise. I didn't understand what he was talking about until I was in a warehouse full of awesome junk. I started drooling when I saw the intact equipment in the building, and Engine told me to take my time choosing things that attracted me because there were no junk monsters nearby. I went crazy as I plunged into the scrap heap to find the best things I could repair and reuse. Engine just smiled as he witnessed firsthand how crazy I was for junk, but neither of them noticed that the small TV on top of the pile of junk was working, and it showed an image of a man wearing gloves similar to mine. Anyway, I and the others soon arrived at headquarters, and they were greeted by an eccentric shouting that it was finished. I didn't even know who this guy was or what he was talking about. And before anyone could explain it to me, the motherly receptionist said she had heard about Gob's passing. However, before she could express her condolences, the crazy guy interrupted and told me that my mask was done. At this point, Engine introduced the guy named August to me, saying that he handled their gear, and because he was an artist, he also had a few screws loose. August then began to praise his latest artwork, saying that it was truly perfect. He talked about how he hadn't even met me before, but he had taken my measurements while I was sleeping, and then he had learned all about my personality from Engine and the others. I was shocked to hear that August had been in my room and measured my face, and that crazy bastard said he was lucky I hadn't locked the room door. Rio also commented that I didn't even sleep much, so it had been a rare feat for August to find me sleeping. Just then, the timid nurse from before rushed towards August and told him to shut up because he was embarrassing her in front of everyone. He didn't even acknowledge his sister, and I couldn't believe these two completely different eccentrics could be siblings. Anyway, they were ready to head out on the mission with that, and once they were out of the building, Engine told me to take off my collar for a moment. I obeyed him, and then suddenly all the group members pricked and cut their fingers to get a bit of blood and mark the collar with it. I was confused by this strange demonic ritual, but Engine told me that their collars were communication devices that allowed them to talk to other cleaners who had shared blood with them. I asked if this was why everyone on Earth wore collars, and Rio affirmed that it worked like a phone. She said that exchanging blood gave a sense of shared life and death. Therefore, she really liked this idea, and I put the collar back on. I wondered what kind of technology it used, and then thought that perhaps it was another power of the giver. As soon as I snapped out of my thoughts, I saw everyone staring at me menacingly, telling me that they would need to take my blood too, and I was terrified. With the blood exchange ritual complete, the group finally got into the vehicle and headed to the wasteland to find the woman who knew about the barrier. I had brought a lot of junk that I found at the junkyard earlier, and Engine told me that most of it would not be used because they would have to walk in the wasteland and I couldn't carry everything. However, I insisted that these were all backups, and we never knew what tools might come in handy. Soon after, they arrived at the red desert called Penta, one of the 5 wastelands in this world. Tamsi was the first to climb down into the red sand, and when he examined it, he found out that it wasn't sand, but rust. Just then, he spotted a junk monster moving towards them at a very high speed, and the other group members also noticed it. Engine decided to let me handle the junk monster on my first hunt. After joining the cleaner group, I immediately slid down the sand slopes with my new mask. The battle began, and the female support started taking notes on the junk monsters they faced. Rio decided to fight 3 scorpion-type junk monsters at once, slicing them with her giant scissors. A part of the scorpion's body rolled away, hitting another junk monster in the distance, which thought that Zanka had done it because he was standing in front of it. The junk monster attacked him and pushed him back, and Zanka just focused on dodging until he found the perfect opportunity to counterattack. Then, he attacked the monster's jaw with his staff and unleashed its true ability to shoot spikes forward, piercing through the monster's head and killing it on the spot. However, he couldn't relax yet because more monsters had surrounded him. But just as he was about to fight them, Engine rushed towards him with his special attack, taking down all but one of the trash monsters. I decided to face it myself, and I charged towards the monster, pulling out a keyboard to fight it. My power awoke the keyboard's hidden potential, and far away from me. The woman in the desert took notice of it. Back on the battlefield, I became the keyboard warrior that all Twitter activists think they are. I could only type like my 90-year-old grandma, but as soon as I hit enter, the keys started to hover and fly high into the air before attacking the scorpion trash monster like bullets, spelling hole on its back before it turned to ashes. All the monsters were defeated, and Ingen began to inspect the trash hidden under the red sand. Meanwhile, Gris began to scold the other support for taking notes while everyone else was fighting. He told her that it could be dangerous if she wasn't fully focused on survival. But the girl told him that she would forget everything if she waited until the battle was over. Meanwhile, as I was trying to wipe sand and dirt off my mask, I caught a glimpse of a woman in the dust cloud. However, before I could take a step towards her, Delma and Tamsy found me. I fell to the ground, startled by Delma's loud voice, who told me he couldn't see my first fight because there was too much sand. I thought that at least now I was useful. But then Delma suddenly stopped talking and began to stare at something right in front of him. I turned around too, and I was shocked to see a girl happily walking towards them. Delma and Tamsy were wary when they saw the girl not wearing clothes suitable for this harsh environment, and they said they couldn't even sense her presence. Everyone else gathered around, and Ingen wondered if she was the woman from the stories who had seen everyone come from this sphere and returned. Zenka said it was too early for them to find the woman, and Ingen said they should try to talk to her and at least ask for directions. Rio, however, was a bit more direct, and she asked the girl if she had ever seen anyone come from the celestial sphere or tried to return. The girl affirmed, and Rio told everyone that they had found the person they came here for. Ingen said they were lucky this time, and then the girl named Ammo suddenly started coughing. She told everyone to come to her house so they could talk in peace, because the air here was not good for their bodies. Rio was suspicious of her and asked Jin if she should go alone and talk to the girl, but he decided they should all go. He felt that even if the girl was plotting something, they could still talk openly, and if she truly became a danger, it would be better if they were all present to fight her. However, his plan failed miserably, and once they arrived at Ammo's house, which was filled with scary soft toys and dolls, Ingen threw up and collapsed. Now I was the only one still conscious, and as I tried to understand what was happening, Ammo smiled sinisterly at me. It all started an hour before, when my friends and I decided to follow Ammo, unaware of her true plans. Ammo led them to her home, a very tall tower, supported by rocks on all sides. Everyone was surprised by this, as they never thought they would find a structure like this in the middle of the wasteland. But I wondered if this tall tower could take me all the way to the celestial sphere. Unfortunately for me, the tower was not as tall as I thought. Ammo opened the gate and invited everyone inside the tower. Once inside, they saw a massive door that was locked and heavily chained, and Gris commented that he didn't like anything about this place. Ammo told him that this was the living room, and it was very messy, but they should come to her room to enjoy her hospitality. They followed her through the suspiciously well-maintained tower, and on the way, Emma asked them to take off their masks, because the toxic air from outside couldn't get in here. She said it was a bit scary and disrespectful if they kept their masks on in her house. When they arrived at her room, everyone took off their masks, and Ammo was truly amazed to see their faces. They were also surprised to see that her room was quite strange compared to the surrounding environment, and the female support also took note of it. I wondered how she could have so many things in the middle of this polluted desert, but then Ammo asked them what they wanted to talk about. I nodded at Ingen before approaching Ammo and asking her if she could tell me more about people who could move freely between the surface and the celestial sphere. Ammo didn't like that topic, and said they should talk about who they liked and similar things instead. Everyone was silent at this, and Ammo said she liked people who smelled strong, and that scent was more important to her than faces. I wondered if this was Tanjiro's long-lost sister, and then Ammo took a deep breath to declare that the big guy in the back was the most attractive to her. She started laughing like a madwoman, which made me shiver. So Ingen decided to take control of the conversation. He asked Ammo if talking about romance was the price she needed to give them information. He said they wanted to know about people who could travel between the surface and the celestial sphere, and if she wanted to talk about love and people she liked in exchange for that, then he had no problem. Ammo suddenly became furious upon hearing this, and she started screaming that they were all selfish people who only came here to take advantage of her. She said she was genuinely happy to have someone come talk to her, but they probably wouldn't have come here if they didn't have another objective in mind. She started losing control, and Ingen realized that he had messed things up. He tried to control the situation and suddenly told Ammo that he liked her, which shocked all his friends. However, he messed up a second time by saying that because even Ammo could tell he was lying. She screamed that she hated liars. So, Engine decided to say the most honest thing that came to his mind at that moment. He told Ammo that she should cover herself better because he was getting distracted just by looking at her. Well, that was the third strike, and Ammo completely lost her temper. She said that guys who want to control women's freedom are the worst, and activated her powers to fight him. Engine had long had a hunch that this girl was a giver, but then I noticed her boots had the same symbol as my gloves. I felt a strange resonance with her power. And then Ammo suddenly told Delma to shoot. Engine didn't understand what she meant, but when he turned around, he saw Delma pointing a water hose at him. Before anyone could understand what was happening, Delma shot Sunjin, taking him down with high-pressure water. Everyone was shocked to see this, and they asked Delma how he could do that, but he was clearly no longer conscious. I snapped at Ammo, asking her what the hell she did to Delma. I told her that her boots had the same symbol as my gloves, and I asked her about that too. But Ammo completely ignored that part and returned to her original question, asking everyone what kind of people they like. Everyone was silent upon hearing this, and Ammo asked them why they weren't saying anything since that's how communication works. She said it wouldn't be fun if she was the only one talking because she rarely had guests here. Ammo said she loved guests except for party poopers like Engine and asked everyone to get back to the conversation. Suddenly, Zenka started walking towards her because he understood how to deal with this crazy girl. She only listened to players who played along with her chosen topic, or those who tried to stop her. Well, he chose the second option because he wouldn't let anyone harm his idol without punishment. He called Ammo a cow and said she was his enemy, so he was going to crush her. Ammo started crying when she heard this and asked how he could call her the C word. She assumed he was treating her badly, even though she hadn't done anything wrong. She said she was truly hurt, but Zenka realized that an attack was imminent, and he dodged a heavy blow from Delma just in time. Zenka was sure that Delma was being controlled like a puppet by Ammo, but it turned out her control was deeper than that. Delma suddenly started screaming at Zenka, asking him how he could hurt the fragile girl with his harsh words. He stood in front of her, saying that Ammo was the reason he fought, and he wouldn't let anyone hurt her. While everyone thought he had been brainwashed, Tamsi insisted that he truly meant it. He knew Delma well enough to say that he was serious right now, and that meant he was acting on his own will. No one understood how that could be, but then Ammo told them that the big guy had been her fan for a long time. That still didn't make sense to them, because Delma wouldn't betray his friends just for a girl. However, Ammo insisted that he would betray them all, just to help her. At her command, Delma activated his life item, which was a water hose, and he became larger and stronger along with the hose. As everyone prepared to fight Delma, I blamed myself for causing a fight no matter where I went. Suddenly, I started hearing voices telling me I was right, and that the tainted bloodline of a criminal would only cause problems no matter where he went. As I began to sink into negative thoughts and self-hatred, I heard Ammo's voice saying that there was another one of her fans here. She said she just wanted everyone to stay here and have fun. But if anyone tried to break that fun, she would order her second fan to deal with them once and for all. Meanwhile, I returned to my nightmare, and this time, the guards from the Celestial Sphere were there to capture me. I started to hyperventilate and gasp when I saw them, and then a guard tried to attack me. Fortunately, Tamsi got me out of there and saved me from Delma's attack at the same time. He told everyone that Delma's life item was a hose because he used to enjoy watering plants and watching them grow. Now, his life item makes anything it touches absorb water, including human cells. When human cells absorb too much water, they can burst like a balloon, killing his target instantly. But before today, Delma had never used that ability on humans. Tamsi was sure that Delma had watered Engine from behind to take him down, but no one could understand how he could do that without being noticed. Tamsi explained that there were different settings on the nozzle, and Delma must have used the silent nozzle setting to go unnoticed. Rio told the boys that they were talking too much while they had bigger problems to deal with. She said that someone needed to calm Delma down because otherwise he would defeat them all, and she volunteered to do it. She walked towards the big guy while everyone told her that she was being too reckless. However, Rio believed Emma that there was another admirer of hers there, and that was why she couldn't trust any man. However, as she turned to glare at them, Zenka told her to look ahead. She turned back in time to see Delma shoot a high-pressure stream of water at her, creating a hole in the wall. Fortunately, Rio dodged the attack in time, and Ammo mocked her for not being able to trust her friends. Now she said that nothing would have happened if everyone had listened to her and just talked about their romantic interests. She told them that they still had a chance to indulge in romantic gossip, and Tamsi thought she was crazy. Then, he turned to me and told me to get up, but I was shaking because my illusions were getting stronger. Now he saw Tamsi and Zanka as police officers from the Celestial Sphere and wondered how he got there. Everyone was confused by this, but then they noticed a strange scent in the air. I noticed it too, and the illusory world around me began to change again. I heard Amo's voice, telling me that while most people only think about what they've seen and heard when they talk about memories, she thinks about smells. Her appearance suddenly began to change as she told me that if I didn't talk about my romantic interests with her, she would make me relive my memories. Amo transformed into Chiwa, the girl from the Celestial Sphere whom I liked, and the scene changed to the cliff where I last met her. I couldn't believe what was happening, and then the fake Chiwa pulled out the toy I had given her. She said she would cherish it forever, but I was angry about this because she had thrown away the toy while I stood by and watched. As I relived my trauma in 4K, Tamsi finally realized that Amo made everyone see something that turned them into her allies. Amo replied that she didn't show anyone anything. Instead, she used her boots to create a scent that made them think of happy times. And once everyone got lost in their memories, they always protected her. She suddenly realized she had said too much. And then Tamsi and Zanka put their masks back on, saying that if they could just block the scent, they would be fine. Zanka added that not all memories of those they loved were happy, and that if someone started to hate those they once loved, Amo's power would backfire on her. She was angry about this and called him a fool for underestimating her. She declared that her power only made people dream of happy times. And at the same time, I was facing an emotional turmoil. Even though I hated Chiwa for throwing away the toy, I couldn't be angry with her. Feelings of happiness and love began to overwhelm me, and I had a sudden urge to protect her. I saw Tamsi and Zanka as two soldiers harassing Chiwa, and when she cried for help, I rushed towards her, throwing the two men away. Zanka yelled at me, but I was too far away to hear his voice. I still thought they were soldiers from the Celestial Sphere and told them that I was not as weak as I used to be. I declared that now I had the power to protect those I loved, and I would use that power to kick their asses. Zanka and Tamsi realized that the situation was bad now, but it soon got worse. Rio and Folo were also brainwashed by Amo's ability, and they started walking towards her, saying they would protect her. Now only Zanka, Tamsi, and Gris were still conscious, and as they wondered how to escape the situation, Tamsi decided to use his ability on his friends, even though he never wanted to. Meanwhile, Delma recalled happy moments in his life when he used to plant trees with his wife because she loved them. She was very happy when they managed to grow their first plant to a decent size after much effort. But Delma wanted to fill their house with plants to show that hope could sprout even in a polluted world like theirs. Now Amo's power made him think that she was his wife and mine. Rio and Folo were also in similar illusions. She asked Zanka and Tamsi if they still thought they could defeat her, and Tamsi pulled out his spool stick and transformed it into a staff. Delma thought that Tamsi and the others were robbers who had hurt his wife, and he was angry with them. He rushed at them at the same time as I and the others, but Tamsi quickly activated his ability, unleashing thick ropes in all directions. In an instant, everyone was tied up in those ropes, but Amo didn't think much of it. She asked her admirers to do something for her, and Rio struggled to break free from the ropes that tightened around her legs. Everyone else did the same, and Tamsi told them that the more they moved, the tighter the ropes would get around them. However, none of them seemed to stop, and Tamsi was frustrated because he thought this level of pain would be enough to snap them out of it. Amo called him a fool for hurting his own friends, but she told him that it would be useless because once someone loved her, they would endure any pain to help her. She laughed and said there would be bloodshed. But then Tamsi told her about his life item. He told her it was a stick for winding thread and then immediately spun it, pulling all the ropes back onto the spool. Everyone was pulled towards him along with the ropes, and when it stopped spooling, I and the others were trapped in a solid wall of ropes. Along with them, Tamsi had also caught Amo, who was now hanging upside down from the roof. Tamsi told her to return everyone to normal, while Zanka was a bit disappointed, because he didn't get to do anything this time. Tamsi replied that he had called Amo a cow, which had made her angry, and that should count for something. On the other hand, Gris rushed to Tom, the support woman, who was checking on Engine. Gris was happy to see that she was wearing a mask, but unfortunately, Engine was still not functional. Tom had put a mask on him as a precaution, and now they could only wait until the battle was over. On the other hand, Amo started to feel pain from the ropes, and she cursed Tamsi, telling him that it had been a long time since anyone had treated her so roughly. She suddenly started crying and begged for help, but Zanka thought that no one would escape those solid ropes. Well, that wouldn't stop Delma and the others from trying. They used all their strength to break free from the ropes. Even as the ropes began to cut into their hands, Tamsy was frustrated trying to hold back so as not to hurt his friends, and he decided to stop Delma first because he seemed to be the most motivated to help Amo. He suddenly controlled the ropes around Delma, making them spin rapidly. Delma essentially turned into a super heavy Beyblade, drilling through the floors until it reached the basement. However, that wasn't all his special attack did. Zanka just clung to a piece of the floor so as not to fall to the same level as Delma. He told Tamsy that he had overdone it because the others were also in disarray. I had an iron bar piercing my stomach while Delma was buried in the rubble. Rio and Folo were also lying unconscious in a pool of blood. But Tamsy thought he had handled the situation well. When Zanka blew up at him for killing his own friends, Amo started to mock them, telling them that this is what happens to people who don't talk to her. She said that half of them were dead now because they wouldn't play with her, and Zanka blamed Tamsy for all of it. However, it seemed that I was still alive, and I pulled the iron bar out of my stomach. Tamsy turned to Zanka with a menacing look, and Zanka was afraid that he was also somehow under Amo's spell. However, Tamsy simply asked him if he had forgotten something. Zanka didn't even know what he was talking about, and Tamsy reminded him of the spell that Remlin had drawn on all of them, protecting them from a fatal blow. Zanka realized as everyone stood up and immediately felt quite better, and Amo couldn't understand what was happening. Suddenly she saw Engine behind her, and he had taken her boots without her knowing. Amo was so shocked that it took her a few seconds to react, and in that time Engine said he hated people who don't wear socks with shoes. Amo then suddenly lunged at him, telling him to give her boots back because she wouldn't forgive him if they lost the scent of that special person. Engine wondered what was so special about that scent, and he decided to try it and took a sniff. He immediately regretted having free will, but Amo continued to fight him for the boots. Engine told her he would return it if she revoked her ability and freed everyone from her control. And she replied that she couldn't use her powers with only one boot, so everyone was free. While I and others sat in silence wondering what had happened to them a few minutes earlier, Delma pushed away the heavy concrete slabs that were on him. Just then, Tamsy and Zanka walked towards him, and Delma asked them, "What happened here?" Tamsy told him that he had been affected by Amo's power, which made him think she was very close to him, and he had fought very hard to protect her. Delma was shocked to hear that, but the part that hurt him most was that his wife was still dead. For a moment, he hoped that he could have her back, but now that the harsh reality set in, he completely broke down. Zanka noticed that all the others affected by Amo's power were also disheartened because after the dream of happy days ended, reality must have hurt them deeply. Soon after, everyone put on their masks, and then Engine decided to return the boots to Amo. While everyone wondered what to do with her, Engine said that although her power was crazy, Amo was just a helpless girl, and he didn't feel comfortable hurting her. He also didn't want to take away the boots that meant so much to her, so he thought teaching her not to hurt others might be the best thing now. However, Amo suddenly started acting unruly again, telling them they were responsible for destroying her house. Zanka was angry at her attitude and tried to reason with her, but then I took off my mask and started walking towards her. Amo asked me if I couldn't stand her smell, but she didn't know what I was really planning. As soon as I got close to her, I delivered a devastating punch. Amo experienced the shock of being hit before the pain set in, but I didn't give her a chance to retaliate. I climbed on top of her and started punching wildly, but fortunately, Engine and the others stopped me and saved the girl. Some kind of curse began to awaken within me, and when Grizz told me to stop, I paused for a moment. Grizz told me that they didn't need to go that far because they already knew how to neutralize Amo's ability, and above all, she was a girl. I told him that I didn't care if Amo was a girl or not because the Hammer of Justice is unisex. The curse began to consume me as I asked Grizz if I should let Amo hurt and kill the people I care about just because she's a girl, and Grizz yelled that he didn't mean that. He told me that it's wrong to hurt a girl who has no power, and I replied that Amo is a giver, just like all of us, and she almost killed all of us. I said she deserved to be beaten even worse for her actions, and then Engine finally decided to join the conversation. He told me that he understood my thoughts, but then asked how they could get information from Amo after I had beaten her to blood, snot, and tears. I realized it little by little, and when my peanut-sized brain finally processed all the information, I could only stare blankly at Engine's face. Engine took me outside to talk and asked Tom to bandage the girl in the meantime. When they went outside, Engine sat silently, and I became increasingly anxious. I asked him why he wasn't saying anything, and Engine replied that it wasn't necessary because I had already realized everything. I explained myself by saying that all the time I was on the sky bridge I was asked to endure. No matter what anyone said to me, I had to control my anger and suppress it. However, once I reached the ground, I realized that I would lose if I kept suppressing it. But now, after giving Ammo a brutal beating, I realized that I was back to my default settings. I was still the impatient and violent boy, ready to attack anyone without thinking if they hurt me. I yelled that I was still a violent brat, and any maturity I thought I had experienced was just an illusion. Suddenly, Engine said that he really liked women who were smarter than him, had amazing curves, and a tolerant personality. I was completely speechless at this, but Engine continued to say that he didn't really get along with children and women with complex needs because he didn't need any of their emotional baggage. He couldn't hide such things from anyone, and that was one of his bad character traits. Engine told me that this was just an example, and adults have a lot of bad things in life that they need to grow out of. He said that realizing this was the first step to becoming an adult, and he had been made aware of his flaws by others. Compared to him, I had realized everything on my own, and that meant I was on the right track to maturing as a person. I looked at Engine in amazement when I heard this, and he told me that they should apologize to Ammo later. Meanwhile, Tom had bandaged Ammo, and she apologized for my actions, saying that they didn't know I would go that far. Then she took off her mask, told Ammo that she wanted to be her friend, and they could talk about anything she wanted. Ammo remarked that Tom would make a good mother, and then she started talking about her own mother. Ammo said that her mother was a wonderful mother, and she was the reason she found her first love and got her treasure. Her mother also showed her angels who traveled between the earth and the sky bridge. Tom just considered all of that nonsense, but then she suddenly realized that Ammo was willing to talk about people who could travel between the two worlds. But that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.